As always, guys, if you like the videos, make sure you subscribe below. Everyone knows the story. Everyone thinks they know how it ends. A giant wooden horse. Greek soldiers hidden inside it. Left at Troy's gates as a gift. The Trojans wheel it into their city. And that night, the war is over. Or so the story goes. Here is a strange fact. In the entire body of Bronze Age writing, every Hittite tablet, every Mycenaean palace archive, every Egyptian letter, nobody mentions this horse. The oldest surviving version of the trick shows up in a poem written 400 years after Troy fell, which raises a very fair question. Did any of it actually happen? Well, Troy was real. That much we know for certain. It sat on a low hill, on the coast of what is now Turkey, controlling the strait between the Aegean and the Black Sea, a checkpoint worth going to war over. When 19th century archaeologists dug there, they found something wilder than a single lost city. They found 9 cities, stacked on top of each other, rebuilt across 3,000 years, each layer buried by the next. One of those layers stands out. Troy 7a, radiocarbon dated to 1180 BCE. The exact century, the classical Greeks pinned to the war. And that layer burned. Weapons in the streets, skeletons where they fell. Something violent happened at Troy, in exactly the right decade. So Troy is real. A war is plausible. The question is what actually happened here, because the wooden horse story itself is almost certainly not literal history. Homer, our oldest source, barely mentions the horse at all. It gets a single passing reference. In the Odyssey, the scene we all picture, the hollow belly, the hidden soldiers, the midnight raid, comes centuries later, from poets who never saw Troy and had no witnesses to interview. And when you actually stop and think about it, the trick falls apart. But notice what the story is really about. Something was let inside Troy. Something the Trojans themselves welcomed, through their own gates. That deep shape of the story clearly survived. But what was really inside the gift? What real object at Troy's walls could a wooden horse let inside possibly be a memory of? There are 2 very different theories, and both are trying to explain the same puzzle. What was the horse a memory of? The first theory comes out of Bronze Age military archaeology. Between roughly 900 and 600 BCE, Assyrian palace reliefs kept depicting the same weapon over and over again. A wheeled battering ram, wooden frame, covered in wet animal hides to make it fireproof, with a heavy log slung inside on ropes, and carved on the front a decorative head, sometimes a snake, sometimes a lion, and sometimes something that looked exactly like a horse. Now, the Bronze Age Greeks did not have a word for battering ram. It was cutting-edge military tech. So when survivors described the Greek machine that came to their gates, they described what they saw. A wooden creature, on wheels, with a carved head. Later Greek poets, working from oral tradition, took that image and reworked it. In their retelling, the wooden animal was no longer a Greek weapon at the walls. It became a Greek deception, something the Trojans themselves had wheeled inside as a gift. The horse stayed the same. The mechanism flipped. That is the first theory. The horse in the myth is a compressed memory of a battering ram, the let inside as a gift element, being a later poet's dramatic invention. The second theory goes in a completely different direction. It starts with a strange coincidence. In Greek mythology, Poseidon, god of the sea, is also the god of horses, and he is also the god of earthquakes. 3 seemingly unrelated things, until you remember what a horse actually looked like to a Bronze Age farmer. It was raw power that shook the ground when it ran. Now look at where Troy sits. Right on the North Anatolian Fault, one of the most seismically active zones on Earth. The same fault that leveled Izmit in 1999 and struck again in 2023. An earthquake here is not a rare event. It is a Tuesday, and around 1200 BCE, the whole eastern Mediterranean shook. Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, Hattusa, one great citadel after another, collapsed within a single generation. Look at the Troy 7A layer. With all that in mind, sections of the walls tell a story of ground shaking, not battering. Buildings inside cracked along stress lines that match Earth movement. Something shook Troy hard. So here is the second theory. Poseidon, earth-shaker horse god, sent an earthquake that struck Troy during its siege. And when the survivors told the story to their grandchildren, they described it in the only language they had. Poseidon's horse, the earthquake, arrived at the city that night. Centuries later, poets who had forgotten what an earth-shaking horse originally meant reinvented it as a literal wooden animal. And needing a way for that animal to matter in the story, gave it hidden soldiers, and a gift, and a trick. Two theories. A siege engine. An earthquake. So which is right? Most working archaeologists today think the answer is both, at least in part. The Troy 7A layer shows arrowheads embedded in the stones, slingstones piled at the gates, skeletons in fighting posture. This was absolutely a violent human attack. Greeks, or someone very like them, took the city. That part is not myth, but the same layer shows the pattern of seismic damage right alongside the battle debris. So the best current theory is that both things happened around the same time. Troy was under siege. A quake struck the region during the siege. The Greek army, waiting outside for who knows how long, pressed their attack while the defenders were reeling. Troy fell to a lucky quake and a patient army, a combination the survivors could only explain as a gift from Poseidon himself. And 3,000 years later, poets took that gift and turned it into a wooden horse, wheeled inside the walls, full of hidden soldiers. A story sharper and easier to remember than the god of horses shook the earth the night the Greek siege engine reached our gates. That is the strange thing about myth when you look closely. It rarely lies outright. It compresses. It takes something that actually happened, messy, technical, half-remembered, and squeezes it down into a single image, sharp enough to last 3,000 years. The wooden horse was never a wooden horse. It was a memory of a god who shook the ground, of a Greek weapon at the gates, of something arriving at the walls that the Trojans could not stop, all wrapped up in a shape a 9-year-old could remember and repeat. And here is the wild part. That memory is still working. You are hearing it right now. So which theory do you buy? Battering ram? Earthquake? Or both? Drop your answer in the comments, and I will see you at the next mystery.